Hello, Ankit. My name is Alexei, and I'm a tech lead at Turing. My focus is mainly on Turing products, and I'm currently leading a team of engineers and developers that help me with the current vetting process here. I've been in the software development for more than 14 years now. So naturally, I've been given and taken multiple interviews. I hope this turns out to be a great experience for you. Um, what about you? Can you tell me about yourself, what you're doing, and what are you right now?
Sure. So thanks, Alexi, for great introduction. And myself, like I'm Ankit. I'm currently based out of Jaipur in India, and like right now, I have been working remotely for past 5 years now. And so I'll just go over from the beginning of my career. So basically, completed my graduation, post graduation in 2012, and right after that, like I joined Oracle, and I was working on their virtual machines, like their um, virtual machines environment, and like uh, they had a product called Oracle Database Appliance, which was basically using virtual machines in that, and I was in that team, and I was working on that. After that, so I spent like 2.5, 3 years there, and then like I joined a startup which was working in US healthcare domain, and I worked in that startup for like 5 years or so, and there basically I worked majorly on Ruby on Rails, and the tech stack was mainly Ruby on Rails, Sinatra, and some work we did, some work I did on front end as well, like basically building those admin related functionalities and all. And after that, so currently, like I've been working with another US healthcare company, which is basically having multiple clinics throughout the United States, and I've been assisting them in building their uh, billing infrastructure. So my major, like for the past 7, 8 years, like I have been focusing majorly on the US healthcare domain, and yeah, I've been building products using Ruby on Rails and recently using Scala as well.
Wow, very interesting. I think for me personally and for our subscribers, it would be interesting to listen more about your experience with virtual machines. Can you tell me more, please, about the tech stack and maybe some tips and hints that you had taken from this job? So your experience.
Sure. So Oracle Database Appliance, like they offer it um, similar to rack machines they have. It's a small database cluster which they provide out of the box, and like uh, in that basically, so virtual machines they you can basically deploy multiple virtual machines in it, and they use Zen hypervisor on top of it, and they were using, so basically I was building uh, a utility which can help them to start so basically do all the operations with the virtual machines, like start, stop, and having some fallback mechanisms on the top of it. So major language I was using was Python in there. And yeah, so like we were building everything in house for that uh, product. And yeah, that's all I can share.
Great. I had some similar experience with but we were using Bash for this. So Python, I think it's a more powerful choice. But okay, let's go forward. It's really interesting how you have progressed in your career with this Ruby, Sinatra, JavaScript, and so on. So you were mainly working as a backend engineer. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I'm actually glad that you're able to have this experience. You must learn a lot On your current work, do you get a lot of programming?
Yeah, so I've been working as a senior software engineer currently. So yeah, I do a like majority, like I would say like 60% of the time I'm like coding in these days, and like rest of the time, like I've been working on primarily on the RFCs or like design documents and other team related works like PR reviews, etc. Yeah.
Very interested in your Ruby on Rails experience. Can you describe me the the most interesting project that you built or more sophisticated from a technical perspective?
Sure. So, like with my past, basically with my Ruby on Rails experience, like we were building, so the company for which I worked, like they were building a clearinghouse in US. So for like US healthcare. So what clearinghouse does is like, so in US healthcare, like for any, let's say there is a doctor and they did some procedure on you, and now that doctor needs to submit your bill of whatever procedure they have done to an insurance company. So they cannot submit that bill directly to an insurance company. They need a middleman in between, like via which this bill goes to the insurance company. Because in US, like insurance companies, they support typical, they have to follow a guideline and they have to support XRail related transactions. So clearinghouse, the job of clearinghouse is to basically take the requests from these providers and doctors and like convert them into relevant transactions, connecting with the different insurance companies and like sending those claims out to those insurance companies and getting back in the payments, etc. So like as a clearinghouse, like we built APIs, REST APIs using Sinatra and like Ruby on Rails, and we provided these REST APIs to our customers, uh, and they were basically using these APIs to submit their claims to the clearinghouse, to the insurance companies, and getting back the payment reports, etc. And so the scale of this is like we were doing millions of transactions over like daily, and like because like it's not just the claims, like there are different let's say eligibility inquiries. So there are different transactions which needs to be supported in it. So we had like APIs for each of those, and so we built like those performant and scalable APIs so that like our systems were not uh, getting overloaded and were not so they were able to support like millions of transactions daily. So that was like one of the interesting thing. And like basically building REST APIs is easy, but then like making them performant enough so that like they are not they are handling the load properly, and meanwhile like keeping the code cleaner, and like keeping the code is structured as well so that like everyone can participate, and like it's easier, like it's basically readable, and like it's not something like which can't be maintained further as well. So that was like the main thing.
Regarding the code, I wanted to ask you, of course, the question, how do you organize your code in the Ruby on Rails application? Looks like you have very excited experience with the high-load application. So can you tell me more how the application logic is placed there?
Right. So in general, Ruby on Rails, like it follows MVC pattern, that is like models, views, and controllers. So that's the typical architecture we use in a Ruby on Rails project. So what that means is like, so let's say, let's go via a particular request coming into our servers, and let's go via that. So whenever a request hits our servers, like basically there's a routes file which determines to which controller that request should go to. So controllers are the one, like they act as an interface for any requests or which are coming in. So generally, like controllers' work is to determine like which view. So view is basically like if there is any visual representation which needs to be done, like if there is any HTML template, etc., which needs to be displayed to the front end, like so controller can figure out like which view it should call, and controller also like determines like which data it should pull from, like which so basically if there is anything, so controller determines. So the business logic, so there are two approaches to it. Like people keep controllers as very thin, and then business logic can reside in the models, or like business logic can reside in the services as well. And so models are basically responsible for like anything which you are doing related to database, like any data related stuff or any like database related queries which you need to make, like you can keep that in the models. And then you can have a service layer which basically has all other business logic, which basically tells that, okay, these are the models you need to call, this is the data you need to extract, and then return back to the controller, which controller can pass on to the views as well, like if needed. And then like that's how like it responds back.
Sounds interesting. So you're using active records pattern, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about the pros and cons of this pattern? What's the troubles you faced using it in Ruby on Rails? Because in a lot of languages, has problems with the leaks of memory. So
right. So active record, like we haven't faced any problems related to memory leakage in Ruby on Rails. So in general, like it has been like really helpful as an ORM, like, and like it's in general, like we didn't face anything. So active record has been working great for us. Like we didn't face any issues like where for that particular issue, like we don't have to use active record. Uh, but yeah, like there are sometimes like there are queries which are like difficult to write using an ORM. So in those cases, like active record does support like where you can just basically you can use raw SQL queries as well. So we were using MySQL as a database. So like in those cases, like where the queries were like very difficult, or like if there are multiple joins involved, etc. So we did raw SQL queries as well. But yeah, those were like smaller cases.
so for this project, you were using MySQL database.
Yeah.
No Postgres, no storage procedures, triggers, something like this.
Yeah. So for like in my current role, we are using Postgres, stored procedures, etc. But yeah, in the past project, like in Ruby on Rails, like we were using MySQL as well, like it was working for us. So.
Are you excited about storage procedures or not?
Yeah, I haven't worked much on them, but yeah, I really like the concept. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me more about something specific about Ruby on Rails? Probably helpers, maybe observers or callbacks, something which is more related to the language. What's experience do you have? Insights?
Sure. So yeah, so callbacks, yeah, let's start with the callbacks. So callbacks are generally like, let's suppose you have a model, and let's suppose it's a user model, and now like after every like of let's say, so there are different callbacks which Ruby on Rails support. So there could be like before create, or like after save, or like before save. Those are different stages. So you can basically add some hooks, like let's say after creating a particular object, you need to run some function or like do some work related to uh, and you can add that in that particular model as well. So that is basically that before create or after create, that is called as callback. And generally like it's defined in the model itself, like whatever is happening. So, and observers, like they are similar to callback, but basically like observers, like you can have them outside of the model, and you can basically define for, let's say for 2 or 3 models, like you can define an observer where like it would be, now that particular class will be observing those models, and then you can perform functions like after create, before create, and like similar functions you can do it with callbacks. But the benefit with observers is like you can observe like multiple models from a single class. So let's say you have different models, but you don't have to write in each of them, like if they are performing same function, like same type of function at each after create, then you don't have to write them in each model, like you can extract that logic out. Yeah, and then last part was helpers, right? So yeah, so helpers, generally helpers are some common logic, or like let's say some logic which we can use in our views in the Rails application. So like there are a couple of inbuilt helpers which Ruby on Rails provide, and on top of that you can write your custom code as well. Like, so let's say you have some method which you want to use uh, at multiple views, so you can basically write it as a helper, and then you can just use them anywhere in the code. So one example could be like just changing the time zone for uh, for a date like which you are displaying. So let's say you want to change that time zone and you want to display that date as the local, whichever user is using at the client side time zone. So you can have a helper function for it, and then like in whichever views you want to use it, like you can just use that function rather than duplicating the code.
How you follow the dry principle in your Ruby on Rails applications? Dry means do not repeat yourself. I'm pointing to modularity, maybe namespaces. What do you have?
Right. So like there are different things which Ruby supports. Like one is mixins or traits, which you can use to basically not repeat yourself, and like basically keeping that code in a manner like where basically it's not it can be used by multiple models, and like you are not like duplicating. And other thing could be for reducing basically duplication, it depends. So for reducing duplication, like it depends like where you are doing it. So these helpers, these mixins or like traits, and then uh, yeah, so active support, like they have concerns. So like if you are trying to reduce your duplication of code in the models, so then maybe you can go with active support concerns as well. So like you can write there, and then basically like you can define a concern, and then you can include that concern in different models. So that's also possible. And other is like maybe you can delegate some of the work to the services. So like you can have, so let's suppose like you have some validations which you need to perform on a particular thing. So you can move them into validators or so. And similarly, like if there are some form related actions, so you can like shift that part of logic into app/forms or app/services. And then basically that is like helping you to keep your like not repeating the code like at multiple places, and like keeping them well organized as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Sounds interesting. And I think my last question will be about commons and tasks. How you can create a common task for which can be run through command line interface, and how you can schedule it for periodically run.
Correct. Yeah. So in general, like these are called rake tasks, I guess, in Ruby on Rails, and like so you can define them and like uh for the scheduling of them, like either you can, so there's a scheduler.rb file which you can utilize for this, or like in general, like people use like we were using, and like most of the people use external gem called Sidekick. So that's like pretty common for doing any type of async background processing in Ruby. So that's a great gem. And like basically you can mention your schedule in it, like whenever you are scheduling something. And yeah, that's how like we used to do it. Like in general, like we used Sidekick Pro, because in the Pro version, like they were basically providing all the details about like whichever jobs are currently running, and then like if there are certain jobs which are getting retried, you can specify uh, like how many times you should retry a particular job, and if there are any jobs like which are dead, so you get that queue as well, like okay, these were the jobs like which didn't get processed anytime, so you can use that data and you can like do a lot of debugging, etc., on top of that as well. So yeah.
Can you bring a little bit more light on the Pro version? What's the difference between Pro and non-Pro? Is it paid?
Yeah, Pro is paid version. Yeah, Sidekick Pro is paid, and like it basically gives like more control over like what you are doing.
Is it soft as service,
Uh,
or you just need to pay for a license?
I think we have to pay for license. I am not completely sure, but yeah, in general, like because like the normal interface which you are having, like it doesn't provide like search functionalities on like what you are searching, like if your job has failed, etc. So Pro version like has those features, extra features are there. So that's why like we went with Pro.
Wow, I'm really impressed. Thank you, Ankit. It was really nice speaking with you. I hope we'll meet soon again. To everybody else, thank you for tuning into this mock interview series. This is the first chapter, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. We'll be back with many more episodes covering various different tech stacks and languages. If you're looking for some specific more interviews, please drop us your suggestions in the comments in the section below. And don't forget to subscribe the channel and give us big fat thumbs up. Take care, stay safe, and happy coding.